we're going to stop and have some questions. I want to ask you two more things. This book is dedicated to your great friend, the great late essayist Christopher Hitchens, as is the new novel of Ian McEwan, another great friend.
Ian gives the dates, which I didn't do because he was still alive when I handed it in.
Why did you dedicate it to him, and given that he was still alive, and B, how do you miss him?
I dedicated it to him, to the bafflement of my wife. No, she conceded this was a special case, and she loved the Hitch too. But she wants all my books to be dedicated to her. So she's saying, well, if you must, you know. Even though she saw the gravity. And, when Hitch died, it was a sort of a disaster, like a car crash for a while. But then something weird and unexpected and beneficent has been happening. And I touch wood because I'm sure I'm due a terrible depression, such as I got after my sister died, and some time after she died, a couple of years. But so far, what seems to have happened is that he has bequeathed me his love of life, which I always felt was superior to mine. And now I have the sort of the sacred duty of doing his love of life so that he can, now that he can no longer do it.
When you say superior, more enthusiastic, more...
Well, just he was so enjoyed being alive that he never went to sleep. And I like to say to myself that he didn't die at 62. He died at around 75 because his days were about 6 hours longer than ours.
Yeah.
No, he was very strikingly adored every minute, you know. So he's left me that, and we'll see how long that goes on for.
But that makes me also want to ask about, and I'm going back a bit more here to your father, and you've written beautifully about him many times. You've written the foreword, I believe, to his book about language. You once told me the only book, I might have this wrong, but the only book of yours that you knew for certain that your father, Kingsley Amis, read all the way through was Time's Arrow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people make something of this, and he didn't particularly like my stuff, and he didn't at all like the stuff of all my contemporaries. And the truth was, poetry was what he revered, and he thought that fiction was actually a sort of lower middle-brow form that was for entertainment alone. And what he read was thrillers, and his favorite living writer was Dick Francis. And he said to me once, he said, you know, I'm never going to read another novel again unless it begins, a shot rang out.
But do you compare yourself to him as a writer? Because he invited you to follow him as a writer. Is that...
No, he didn't. No, he never gave me a word of encouragement.
Okay.
And nor would I to my children, because it is a very unusual case, the father and son. There have been brothers who write, and Trollope's mother wrote a novel or two, but otherwise it's sort of unknown, as far as I know, in any language. So to say to your children, you can be writers too, is a way of saying you can have my life, which is a sort of slightly creepy thing to do. And also, it's a tremendous long shot. So, no, he never did, and I never will.
But do you miss him as well?
Oh, yeah, and actually...
And how do you miss him?
Well, as I miss Christopher, in that I keep thinking of things that would have amused them, and there's no one to tell. Yeah. And it was sort of marked, the friendship was marked by what my father had with Philip Larkin, and he said in a letter, you know, I can say anything to you. I can admit to my most contemptible thoughts without any fear that you will say that's a bit, sort of 100% candor, and that is very rare. With your other friends, dear friends, old loved friends, you think, I couldn't say that to him. He wouldn't like that. But neither he nor I ever felt that about each other. No inhibition. It was actually, it was like an unconsummated gay marriage, basically.
I hope somebody wrote that down. We should turn to, I have so many other questions, but we should turn to, if you would stand up, come to the microphone. We also have a microphone that we can throw to you if you're adventurous. Come to the line up behind the microphone, and we'll go with some public input. Yes.
Hi. I really enjoyed, speaking of Christopher Hitchens, the parts in Experience where you told stories about taking trips together, and I wondered if you might write about your relationship someday.
Writing about relationship with Hitch. Well, I have written about it in Experience and in Cobra the Dread about his political pedigree as a Trotskyist. He said to me, only a Stalinist would call me a Trotskyite. He said. And he's also the older brother in The Pregnant Widow. He's the main character's older brother. And this was, I had to have this scene in my book, and I gerrymandered the whole novel to get this in. Because put a real character in a book, and the character will have to change to suit the demands of the novel. But this I had to have when, of all his sort of one-liner put-downs, we were once in a tiny restaurant in London, Greek restaurant, waiting for our first wives. And that was the other thing, is that we got married around the same time, had kids at the same time, got divorced at the same time, got remarried at the same time, had more kids at the same time, lost a parent at the same time, all that kind of thing. And you need a friend to be with you for those things. But there we were, and there were two young men, I would say, who were sort of upper-class hippies in wasted suits with long hair. And they were making such a fuss.
Such economy of description. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
They were making such a fuss in the restaurant that we couldn't get talking, and because they were asking the waiters various questions, and they clearly were expecting a large party later in the evening. And so we sort of sat through that. And then one of them came up and elegantly fell into a crouch by the table and looked poutingly up at us from under his fringe. And clearly the pout and the fringe and the crouch had had great successes in the past of bending others to his will. And he said, after a flirtatious pause, he said, "You're going to hate us for this." And Hitch said, "We hate you already."
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Amos.
Hi.
Hi. How do you feel that the novel's position in society is changing, or the novel itself is being changed by new media?
I think the novel is being changed, but I don't think by new media. I think the macro force operating on the novel is simply the acceleration of the speed of history, which has been going on for a generation at least. And I think the novel that we knew in the 1980s, say, the big baggy monster novel, essayistic, with lots of digressions and the novelist following his thoughts, his or her thoughts, that's dead. There isn't an audience to support that anymore. I feel my contemporaries are doing the same, and it's not a bandwagon urge. It's simply because we're modern people too, we're contemporary people too, and I feel that the arrow of propulsion in a novel has to be much sharper than it was. I mean, look what's happened to poetry. And it's all to do with this question of what speed you're moving. And what a poem does is stop the clock, a lyric poem, certainly. It says, right, stop the clock, and we're going to examine this epiphany for a moment, and you're going to look into your own feelings and thoughts, and we're going to compare notes, this is what a poem is. And people don't want to do that anymore. There's dumbing down, but there's also numbing down. That's why they're on their phones all the time. They don't want to be alone with their thoughts. But the novel has been able to adapt, fairly frictionlessly to this. And I get impatient now when writing a scene that isn't leading forward into something. I think maybe it's had quite a good effect on the novel, but that social media and other media will affect people who have grown up with it, and writers who have grown up with it, but not people who are already at my age, because I simply haven't sort of taken it on. It's what my daughters do.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for being here. It's an absolute pleasure. When you were reading your novel, I noticed one thing, and actually the very first paragraph you started to read from. Well, Officer Phipps continued. This is from the Canadian version. Officer Phipps continued to go about his task. According to him, you've had a bit of good fortune, and he was, well, fucked off about it and all. But when you read, you said, he was, well, pissed off about it, which is a term I usually hear, and the one I actually use. I've never heard about anyone being fucked off about something. Is this something that the Canadian editors did, or was this...
No, it's just that I sensitively bowdlerize my stuff when I read it in public, because I don't want to offend people who are offended by that. And you never know if there are children in the audience as well.
I don't see any, but it's going on the internet, and it's apparently okay to offend people on the internet from...
Well,
I think it's well and good.
It's good that there's somewhere where you can still do it. And by the way, Tocqueville, writing about America in, when was it, 1840s or something, said it's an amazing thing, American democracy, but don't they see where it's going? He said it's going to end up just a woozy society of mutual reassurance, and no one will dare say anything at all in case it offends someone else. And incredible to say that in nearly two centuries.
Although they seem to have gotten over that in the attack ads in the current the current.
Yeah, but they're all lying. So
Yes.
You mentioned brothers who write, and I thought immediately of the Naipauls. And many people are still reeling to a point about the recent biography of V.S. Naipaul that makes him look like such an unpleasant figure in many ways. Just in a broad sense, how do you respond to the lives and work of V.S. and Shiva Naipaul?
how do I respond to that life or lives?
Those two lives, because they led many ways different lives, many ways similar ones, and how do you respond to their work?
Shiva Naipaul and
Yeah, Shiva Naipaul as well as V.S.
Who is an incredibly likable man and likable novelist. They were half-brothers. He died young. No, it's true that it's an extraordinary biography of V.S. Naipaul that he authorized, and it's almost like a confessional, that biography. And he describes his relationships with women and their violence and distressing. I think the larger point is that it actually doesn't. It doesn't affect the work. You have to say that the work must be immune to that. But I've had a charmed life with V.S. Naipaul because he's on record as saying that he says that if someone says, he's a very punctual man. He says, if someone says, "I'll see you there around at one-ish or around one," he said, our relationship is at an end. And his other great dictum is never give anyone a second chance. And I was giving the first reading at Shiva Naipaul's memorial service, and I was appallingly late. I was sort of 35 minutes or something. And I thought, well, that's the end of that, you know. And yet he was not only very nice to me that day, but has become a sort of friend. So he forgave the unpunctuality, and he gave me a second chance. So.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your time, Mr. Amos.
Thank you.
You're known in the past, and even right now, for writing frankly about your political views. Right now, there are disgusting atrocities going on in Syria. Could I get your views on that matter?
I was watching a program about Syria this afternoon, and it's a civil war, and it's clearly part of the rolling trouble in the Arab world. I have nothing original to say about Syria, but I think what can be said about the furor caused by the cartoon of the prophet, and by the Danish cartoons and by the French cartoons, is that you wish that those things had never been made or drawn. But once they're there, you have to defend them. And we should make it clear to those people and to those governments that freedom of speech is not some laxity on our part. It's not a decadent hobby of the West. Our system can't work without it. There has to be total freedom of speech, or democracy ceases to function. Although I'm going to do an event with Salman Rushdie in a while for his book about the fatwa in those years, and how very nice it is to have a work that is worth defending, where you can defend the principle with absolute sincerity. Of course, you have to defend the bad examples too, because this is what a principle is. But we're always so clear that this is worth fighting for. And let's remember that the Ayatollah, who needed something to reinvigorate the revolution after the disastrous war with Iran, just picked on this as the best bet for that. And it was utterly accidental so far as Salman was concerned. And the Ayatollah said that he was paid $1 million by world Jewry to write that novel. The moral case could hardly be clearer in that instance. And it was a joy to defend it and to be loyal to Salman.
Thank you.
Well, I look forward to reading you again, as always, and thank you very much for being so generous tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.